I believe we are now live. I think that's what it says in the top corner. Well, hopefully a few will join as we get going, but welcome to the tasting we got going this evening. So this is for those who bought the pack and those who haven't bought the pack. You're welcome to join. This is part of the Fèis week and the build up to our day that's on Thursday in a few days' time. But we've got a couple of tastings before then. We got this one, which is limited releases, and the Fèis release in the pack as well, which is a sort of preview for those who've got the pack. No one else can taste that until our day on Thursday, and then you'll be doing Founders pack live tasting on Wednesday evening, so the night before the tasting as well. So they'll be fully bored of you by the time Fèis Day actually comes around. Yeah. And for our day, for those who are coming or thinking of coming, we've got all the usual stuff with the farm tour with Islay. We've got beer bottler where you can bottle your own whiskey and take home your own bottle of a single cask that we do just for exclusively at the distillery. There is a live band. There's live bands. Cocktails, if you fancy a cocktail, it's going to be over 20 degrees, which is unheard of. So there'll be plenty of cocktails going down. And if you haven't booked, I know we do masterclasses and things that are all bookable. They've all sold out now, but if you do come along on the day, we've got some range tastings and open tastings where you can just sign up and we'll go through some whiskies from the range with you on the day. So yeah, come over if you're on Islay. For those who've bought the pack and are sitting at home maybe this evening, then we'll run through the whiskies here and bring a bit of Fèis over to you. So we've got the 4 whiskies in the pack. So these are the 4 whiskies we've got. Basically our latest limited releases. So we usually do 3-4 releases a year of sort of limited releases. So these are the latest ones, plus the Fèis, which is a pretty special one this year, being the oldest one I think we've ever done for a Fèis release. Is there anything I missed?
No, I think you've covered most things. I think it's exciting to taste the range we got on this evening. The 15th edition Kilchoman, which is fully matured in ex-bourbon barrels. The Loch Gorm at over 10 years of age. And one which I was very excited to release is the Maury Cask Matured, fully matured, which is very different from anything else we've released.
That's it, you've done now.
I can go.
Tasting done, finished. Yeah, so the lineup, we may as well, I guess, get into it. I think we're, a fair few have joined now, so we can get stuck into the 4 whiskies, and we'll, feel free to ask as many questions as you want in the comments, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. Don't worry if I look like I'm looking at my phone. I'm not bored. We've got Catherine who will be sending, hopefully, the questions through, so I don't have to get too close to the screen. But it's nice to see, I think, so many joining from around the world. I think we've got Austria, Germany, Scotland, far-flung places in Scotland, Edinburgh. And so, yeah, great to have you all on board. And we'll, get stuck into the whiskey. So the first one is the 100% Islay that we're going to taste. So this is the latest release that was done towards the end of last year. We do an edition every year. There's a new edition. This is the 15th edition that we did. And what's unusual about this edition, we did it kind of alongside another edition. So we did this one, which is the 15th edition, and we did an all sherry cask matured version alongside it. This is the all ex-bourbon cask version, and bottled always slightly higher at 50% alcohol, the 100% Islay releases. But you generally put the releases together, the casks, choosing the casks and what goes in them. So what's different about these ones, or why did you choose these ones?
I think it's no secret that I love Kilchoman and ex-bourbon cask maturation. It just highlights all the characteristics without masking any in particular. I'm not saying masking is a bad thing, but different, more heavyweight, releases that we've done. So for me, the 100% Islay in ex-bourbon barrels works exceptionally well. It's wonderfully balanced. It's wonderfully fresh, and it's vibrant and light and in character, and the the peat and the smoke and the saltiness is on the back of the palate, but it's quite integrated and it's quite light. And for us at the distillery, I think it's, we're sort of massively proud about what we've achieved and taking it from the barley that we grow in the fields surrounding the distillery right the way through the whole production process.
Yeah, and each year, there's subtle differences with the additions. We took it right from 3 years, so the first ever edition of Hundreds and Islay was literally, I think, 3 years and 3 months old, something. And then every year it's changed usually in age. The age went up a little bit, sometimes sherry cask into the vatting, sometimes all bourbon barrels. And so it's just evolved kind of as Kilchoman has grown into what we have today, which is a minimum of 9 years of age, the ex-bourbon cask. And it's, I think, particularly probably with this range, of whiskies in front of us, the freshness in this and the maltiness and the salty sort of smoke is.
And I think now there's a little bit more cask influence coming through as it gets a little bit older and a bit more mature. And you notice that when you go back and taste the earlier editions of 100% Islay, they're very fresh and vibrant. And now as they get a little bit more age to them, they just have a bit more cask influence, a bit more of that caramel and softness and butterscotch character coming through, but still very light and floral and fresh in character.
Yeah, and although up at 50% alcohol, it's got it does have a bit of strength. It definitely, you feel that, but it's not too harsh or too aggressive. It's still that light, as you said, like light fresh smoke, and I think a lot of the citrus fruits come through in that way as well.
And there's sort of maltiness now as well on the back of the palate, but you do still get, which I enjoy, is you still get that sort of light smoky saltiness coming through as well, which is because we only peat it to about sort of between 10 and 20 parts per million phenols, so very light compared with the malts that we produce from malt that we buy in.
Yeah, and we use all local peat for the peating of our malt, and all these whiskies actually are from Islay peat, whether it's Port Ellen malt or our own malt. But this one we use local peat, and what is it? It's around 12 hours that we peat for.
Yeah, about 12 to 15 hours on peat, so that just gives it a sort of light freshness, but a little bit of saltiness on the back of the palate, but very light in terms of a lot of the Islay single malts. And
going forward, so for those who've been to some of our recent tastings, you might know we did the tour around Europe recently, which we might have seen a few of you around on the tour. We're sharing what's coming up, and we, the 100% Islay has been something that has been developing over the years. Always a limited release that we've done, and never part of the, I guess, core range that's always available. But that's going to change this year. We can't share all the full details just yet, but up, in a month or two's time, we will be releasing a core range 100% Islay, so core range from our own barley. So Rockside Farm is the farm where Kilchoman's built, and we grow all our barley there. Around, what is it now, 300 tons?
300 tons, yeah.
So 300 tons we can grow on the farm, and that barley on Rockside Farm is used in the 100% Islay releases, but that's now evolving into a release that will be part of the core range, always available as part of, similar to Maccabee and Stannig, for those who know those two whiskies well. We'll have a Rockside barley release as part of that. So it'll be an age statement release in our core range, the first one. So it's a pretty exciting, big milestone for us that we're looking forward to sharing with everyone. But we can't give away all the details just yet. But for those at Fèis, they may well get a little try of what's to come from that.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting moment for us because, going for 20 years and releasing our first single malt at 3 years of age, you're diving into some of the casks that you probably would have preferred to leave for a bit longer. So, it's taken us a bit longer to get to that point, but it's great to now be in that position that we can release an age statement.
Yeah, and there's a few other comments coming in. There's people from, looks like the US, Sterling, and it sounds like somewhere in Poland, but I don't want to pronounce that. I'll probably get that very wrong. We're on whiskey number one at the moment, for those wondering. And welcome to send in your tasting notes as well if you're tasting anything in particular coming through on the first dram here. It's up at 50% alcohol, but the reason we're trying this first is, as we mentioned, it's that lighter peating level to this. So the others are all peated a slightly higher level, up at 50 ppm, so you get a bit more of that smoke coming through on the palate. Lived at Rockside Farm, so yeah, so you'll have to get a dram of Rockside when it comes out as the age statement in a couple of months' time. But I think, you know, the 100% Islay style, the Rockside barley that we grow, you know, that was something that used to be done, you know, in a big way on Islay around Scotland, and that's what sort of died away over the years. You know, as the bigger distilleries grew up and up, you know, outsourcing, and you know, if you became a more commercial distilling industry where you outsource the growing, you outsource the peating, outsource maybe the bottling, central warehouses, and the farm distilling style of whiskey kind of got lost, and that's what I guess Kilchoman's trying to recreate with that sort of farm distillery, and being Islay's only farm distillery at the moment, you know, growing our own barley and taking it through the whole production from the field to the bottle is, you know, having one limited release every year has been the slightly frustrating part. So now having it as part of the core range, it can really, you know, tell the full story of Kilchoman and what we do.
And I think it was pretty important in the early days when I was coming up with the idea of building a distillery that we had a point of difference, a uniqueness, and certainly building the distillery on a farm and growing some of the barley was all part of the project, and I'm delighted that we've been able to keep that going, and that we can have our own single malt that's we've looked after every part of the process, and I think that just showcases why Islay was such an important place to make single malt, because it had all the raw ingredients here. And although that people might sniff at the weather we have over here on most of the time, but those who are joining us this week will have some wonderful weather, and they think it's probably like this the whole time. But I assure you that it's not, and it can be pretty tricky for growing malting barley. But on the whole, we always get a harvest in, and we make some fantastic whiskey from it.
Yeah, it's on getting the lighter notes through there, and perfect for a sunny day. Not bad for a heat wave in the UK at the moment. And a few more comments. I think there's 2 people from the Isle of Egg joining in, so welcome to you. The USA as well. Unfortunately, you don't seem to be able to get hold of it as freely in the US. Well, you can blame my brother for that. He looks after the US market, so he obviously needs to do a much better job making sure you've got all the whiskies available there. So send your complaints into James for that one. And the core range 100% Islay, will it be bottled at 50% ABV? No, it will be 46, so similar to the rest of our core range. It'll be at 46% ABV. We will still do a limited releases like the one you just tasted of our Rockside barley that we grow ourselves. So we will still do limited releases at higher strength, but for the core range it will be at 46%. On Islay for the 50th, I came across Kilchoman. Yeah, no, well, glad you enjoyed it, and well, you'll be 53 by now, so, or 54 by now, but you can still enjoy the drams, hopefully.
But I think what we're so pleased about is the different character to the Kilchoman range to the rest of our range, and having this lighter, more floral character really sort of resonates with a lot of people. You know, it's delicate, it's fruity, but it is Islay when you taste and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's what we try and do, isn't it? Generally, with the whole production, is not necessarily it's better whiskey because it's from Islay, but be as much about Islay as possible. So, you know, having all the warehousing on Islay, you know, bottling everything we do, whether it's our own barley or not, bottling it on Islay, using Islay water in production. So kind of everything we do is trying to be as much about the place as possible, and that, you know, the 100% Islay, the Rockside barley releases that we do are you know, completely that, you know, from the island, from the farm. So hopefully you enjoyed that one. We'll shift on through to the second dram. So that's Loch Gorm. So we'll go for the Loch Gorm here, which was released earlier this year. So this was released, I think, in March time. So we've only been launched for a couple of months now. It has a Loch Gorm, similar to the 100% Islay in that we do release a Loch Gorm every year. So every spring we release a new edition, a new batch of the Loch Gorm. It's a dark sort of peated freshwater loch. You know, the peat banks around the loch are the water that we use in production is from a burn that runs down the side of the farm and into Loch Gorm. So it's just across the road from the distillery. We thought a perfect name for this whiskey, because this is our only whiskey that we release in our core range that is a full sherry cask maturation. So all oloroso sherry casks. This is a minimum of 10 years in oloroso sherry, and we've used the big sherry butts. So I think the first one we ever did was maybe hogsheads, or had some hogshead influence.
Had some hogshead influence, and it was a big rich colour. The first one that we did, and it was just called Sherry Cask Matured. Well, the Loch Gorm, the first Loch Gorm, it was big, rich, and some hogsheads were used in that. But on the whole, it's mainly butts that we use, and you know, it's interesting when you taste these alongside the different editions alongside each other, and now they're getting a bit of age. They're just a subtle difference between the last 3 or 4 Loch Gorms that we've released, and this one is, I believe, is it the oldest?
Yes,
nine-year-old last year.
No, last year was just 10, I think. Well, around about 10. I can't remember if it was all over 10 or just under, but around about 10. But this year, definitely minimum 10 years of age for the butts that we put in.
Yeah, and you know, it's a relatively light with when people look at it, Sherry Cask Matured, you're looking at deep, rich colour. This is quite a subtle colour. We've used a few refill casks in this just to balance it out a bit more and just get the characteristics that we want to shine through. And I think you know, I always get this sort of smoky bacon, sort of salty character coming through. So it's still got all those characteristics from Kilchoman, which I think is important, and not being submerged too much in the sherry influence. So it's really trying to get a balance between the sherry influence, but not getting too much of it. And I think you know, this is worked really well. And a bit more age, you've just got a lot more depth of character coming through. But definitely, this, you know, it's from Islay as soon as you stick your nose in the glass.
Yeah, especially when you try it straight after 100% Islay, bourbon cask. You know, all fresh, loads of citrus, malty sweetness. You know, that really top of the palate, and sort of the light, fresh character is the best way to describe the first whiskey. And then you go on to Loch Gorm, and it's rich. You know, that dark meat. I think someone's saying, you know, barbecue meats they get coming through there,
barbecue,
and seaweedy, and it's that much richer, darker, sort of slightly heavier notes all coming in, you know, to the whiskey now, you know, peated at slightly higher level as well, so you probably get a bit more smoke coming through on the palate, but it's not a sort of TCP, not too heavy, you know, earthy smoke. It's still not overpowering on the whiskey.
No, and it's nice and subtle and sweet. I mean, at 46%, you know, you can argue that you don't need a lot of water to open it up. I mean, it's beautifully soft and rounded. You know, you're talking, barbecued meats, barbecue on the beach, I would always describe it, you know, and it's just got a subtle aroma about it. You know, it's all a sherry, mainly because of the characteristics coming through, but you've certainly got a lot of the influence from the sort of peaty notes, but not too much sherry influence, which is really what we're trying to do, is not to make it a sherry blend.
And someone's mentioning there that they think this version's a little brighter, maybe more fruity than the previous ones. I think that's the thing with Loch Gorm, a bit like 100% Islay. Over the years, the age of Loch Gorm has probably been similar for the last 3-4 years now, 9-10 years of age. But each time it's obviously different casks. It's sometimes more fresh, sometimes more refill. And obviously every cask is going to be different anyway. So it's interesting, the different batches. Some you will get this real rich sort of dark chocolate spiciness. The cask will dominate that a little bit more. And then I think other ones will be more similar to this, where, you know, you're saying you get more of that fruit coming through. It's just a bit brighter, less heavy. You know, I think some of them are really viscous and thick. And this is much a little bit different from that.
And I think it's very interesting to taste the range, you know, taste a number of different Loch Gorms to see how they evolved over time. But certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, they've been similar age profile, but different cask types in terms of the profile of the cask that we've used.
Yeah. And someone's enjoying the sherry and Islay character balance, but they're not usually a fan of sherry, but with the Islay character come through, it's obviously working well. I think that's what you obviously try and do whenever we're doing whiskey releases or new releases, is trying to maintain that balance.
Yeah, I mean, I
key word of yours.
Key word. It's the only
word
word I ever use. Is balance.
And
Every
I think whiskey of ours is surprisingly balanced.
Well, I think it's important to showcase and allow the distillery characteristics come through on whatever release you're doing. I think it does that in the Loch Gorm, the sherry matured ones, and ex-bourbon, and then it'll be different for the next one, obviously.
Obviously,
yes.
Obviously, yeah.
Yes.
Down to the expert skills of yourself and Robin.
Well, yeah. Well, as I always say, we just, we give you whiskies, and
yeah, so easy job for us to sell and market it. Is obviously me and my brother's job is just made easy, by your expert skills. Do we ever, Stefan asking about whether we ever experiment with quarter casks or smaller casks?
Yeah, no, we have done, and we did a release. We aged in ex-bourbon cut down casks. I do think that they need to be watched very carefully, and then you might get too much wood interaction at a very early age, and then you lose the balance. You
never want to lose the balance. Never want to lose the balance.
Never want to lose the balance. So yes, we have, but it's a little trickier than, and so that's why I always am a fan of ex-bourbon being the smallest cask that we tend to use on the whole, just because they're going to work very well. But yes, we have experimented, and the release that we did way back now, about 2013 or 14, was it? It worked well, but I would say we'd had to watch the cars very carefully.
Yeah, and someone asking there about, do you still have a lovely photo of it? HMS Loch Gorm.
Right. I'm
not sure if we do.
No, do we?
I don't know. Maybe Catherine will write back to that one.
Yeah, we'll let Catherine answer that.
Yeah, someone I was mentioning about the wine finishes being very well balanced, allowing for the base of our malt and to hold its own through the whiskey. I think that's key, and probably interesting. We'll not move on to it yet, but the Maury is probably one that shifts more toward the cask and intensity. But that's always, I think, the enjoyment is in tasting these casks and watching them develop. Is showing off sometimes more the spirit, and then really throwing in something like the Maury, which is a big, intense.
Yeah, no, I think we've done a lot of different experiments, and I think it's been fun to showcase our spirit character in different cask types, because the cask does play a massive part in the end character. There's no doubt about that, and I think the next whiskey will show that in every respect. And
sorry, just while we're talking about Loch Gorm, it's just, we should probably mention Miguel Martin in Jerez. We get all our sherry casks from in Jerez, and they obviously produce sherry, but it really his main passion is really creating casks, and sourcing the right wood, the right oak, and all our sherry casks come from, I think, Spanish and French oak. Get more intensity, more tannins coming through than using American oak. They grow at very different rates. The oak has more and less porous, more dense. So the differences are actually quite extreme in terms of the color, the character that comes through from the different oak species, and then also the way he treats them, whether they're toasted over a longer period or intensely charred, how long then they're seasoned for, how long the sherry's in there. So we try, and I think he mentioned when we were out there last that you and Jim Swan, when you were deciding on the character of Kilchoman and what cask you'd use, the conversation with him was around what character he wanted coming through it, and he was able to go, well, I'll season them for this long, and because we don't want, in some ways, an old sherry that's had a long time in the wood, and then we take it, you'll get a lot of sherry notes, but you won't get a lot of the wood influence and the tannins and the spice that comes from that. So again, you want the balance of those flavors as well as everything coming through. So it's an interesting thing going down to see Miguel Martin and learning more about how the oak is made, and you really get to understand
a lot more about that end of the process, which is key in terms of the end product. Absolutely. And we've worked with began our team for ever since Jim Swan introduced me to him back in 2006. And we've used his casks, whether they're butts on the whole, but hogsheads are a big part of what we use now. And those, you'd have tried the Saneg, which is part of our core range, which is mainly matured in ex-oloroso sherry hogsheads and a couple of butts. But the intensity of the hogsheads, the smaller casks, bring those flavors through a little bit quicker. And obviously Saneg was released, going back to 2014. It's interesting to see how that brand has developed over the years.
I think for those who, comparing maybe Saneg and Loch Gorm was full maturation, but Saneg, as you mentioned, is more with the hogsheads and with bourbon barrels, so a slightly different character that comes through on those. So interesting, if you're a fan of Loch Gorm, then worth looking at the Saneg, which have a similar sort of style, but with the hogsheads, it's a bit, the richness comes through a bit more, a little bit sweet, and obviously the balance with the bourbon barrels bottled a bit. It's bottled at 46% as well, but I think it's a little smoother.
Yeah, it's I would say a little bit more sherry influence and richer in color and character. This is just, I think, just has a bit more balance.
No, balance again.
Yeah, a bit more balance.
What a chance! Maybe the next whiskey will also be balanced. Someone asking about 60 ABV and above, and whether David, they're asking something we'll try in the future in terms of releases. But
well, I think over 60, you're talking about casking them at a higher strength than 63.5 if you want to, some age on those that release at over 60. I mean, but our spirit can take it, because those of you that have tried our new make spirit off the still will know it's quite floral and sweet and creamy. And I think that has always allowed us to release it at a relatively young age if we used fresh casks. So that's one of the reasons when Jim and I sat down, it was, look, we want a typical Islay style of whiskey, but we would like to release at a young age if the consumers were up for enjoying it at a young age. And fortunately for us, that they've enjoyed it. Jim did a fantastic job in designing and helping me put together the whole project and create a spirit that was going to be good at a young age. And that's helped us develop Kilchoman at right from 2009 when we first released our inaugural bottling.
So the answer is no.
So the answer, I'm sounding like a politician, aren't I?
Yeah.
The answer is unlikely, unless it's a very young single, unless we actually cask the spirit at a higher strength.
I think haven't your sons given that suggestion as a potential idea, but I don't think you've taken it on board.
Taken it on board yet? No.
So
but maybe I should.
Not yet, David, but maybe in the future when he starts listening to us at one stage, we might get something at a bit higher strength. Someone's trying Kilchoman for the first time and very impressed. So that's good news. 2 whiskies down. Hopefully the last 2 go down well as well. So we'll maybe move on to third whiskey. So the first 2 might be familiar to some if you know Kilchoman, although being limited releases, both of them, but they are released once every year, so might be familiar to a few. The next one certainly won't be familiar and very newly released. So this was launched just last month as our limited release for the spring. One cask we've never bottled before, and I think when we were looking up and doing a bit of research, we'd only found, I think, 2 whiskies that have ever, 2 distilleries that have ever released Maury casks that we could see published, and those were both used for finishing. And what we've done differently, and in fact this lineup shows it pretty well, the 100 Islay was all ex-bourbon barrels, the Loch Gorm was all ex-oloroso sherry butts, and the Maury Cask Matured is entirely matured in ex-Maury wine casks. And that's something we do differently from most. I think you're probably very used to seeing Sauterne or Madeira or sherry on the label of whiskey labels, but often that means there's influence from that cask in there. It doesn't tell you the full story. Whereas when we put Maury Cask Matured on the label, what we mean is that is full maturation, not a finish, not a vatting. it's entirely that cask. And what it does is means you really get an influence from that wood and an understanding from where those flavors have come from. You know, the color on this, you're probably thinking, what's got on there? It's like a ruby red color because that wine influence has really taken hold of the whiskey. It's not had any time to form a base sort of character from ex-bourbon barrels, and that's what most people would use these powerful wine casks for, is, you know, get a base level for the distillery character with ex-bourbon barrels and then have a short finish with these casks. But we think it's really interesting and fascinating to try these powerful wine casks, full maturation. You get a full hit of Kilchoman with that wine influence. And you might know a bit more about this wine.
Yeah, I mean, so Maury is a Appalachian Controle wine region in the Roussillon region in the south of France. And it's fortified wine. These casks we use for, and Grenache, the red grape variety, is the dominant grape variety used. So it has a really powerful, rich character that comes through. The casks were pretty old casks that had lots of aging of these wonderful Grenache grape varieties, plus a few others, but 75% is Grenache. And right in the south of France, so it's quite, you know, the temperature down there, it's warm and it's dry. You know, I was always interested to try these casks because it's fortified wine from the Maury region. You know, I was pleasantly surprised. You know, we filled a number of casks and waited to see how it developed. And this is relatively young. You know, I think it's just under 5 years of age. And you know, funnily enough, I still get some salty, briny character on the nose, although it's very rich and powerful in terms of the characters coming through. There still is a little bit there, but this, you know, this was the right time to release it. An age, it shouldn't really matter. It's how the product's developing, how the whiskey's developing in these casks, that you make a call on it. And we made a call on it. This is ready to go. Let's do a release. And I think you know, it's 50%, so it's quite
so 50% ABV, so reasonably punchy. But again, like undeniable, it's not overpowering. There's a lot of flavour that comes through there. It's not masking any of that. And I think, as you said, it was kind of ready. I think this shows, you know, age is vital, you know, and it is to any whiskey, but it is just one part, because if you leave this for 15 years, it'll be completely overpowering, and all you'll taste is the wood and oak, and it will be far too much for the whiskey. So at, you know, 5 years of age roughly, you know, this is, as you said, kind of ready. It's got that right balance of flavors, and you don't want to leave it too long. So it's really how you want to produce your whiskey, or how you want to put it into cask, and what cask you want to use. You know, some of our whiskies are built around trying to be young, fresh, and full of character, and this is probably a good example of that, when it's a pack full of character, but it's a very different style of whiskey to a sort of third fill bourbon barrel that you age out for 30 years. You know, completely different style of whiskey, which is probably why there's 100 odd distilleries and all doing everything their own way, and this is kind of our way. And you know, very few distilleries are doing these, you know, full maturation young wine casks. So really interesting.
And over time, you know, we've experimented a lot with still wine. You know, a strength around the 12 to 14%, and on the whole, we've learned that through experience over the last sort of 15 or so years, experimenting with these cask types, that the higher strength works a little bit better. It binds it together and holds the flavors together, rather than at the lower alcohol strength, they tend to lose that finesse and character. So on the whole, you know, we've learned a lot over the years, that the sort of Madeira, port, tequila, mezcal, the Maury, which is and sweet white wines that are higher strength, fortified wines that are higher strength, make a big difference. Although we have done, you know, some Concerto Cask Matured releases, and we've been very pleased with them. But it's fun to be able to showcase our Kilchoman in a different format, and the casks here really showcases how different the character will be when we're talking about Loch Gorm and Maury come from the same spirit character, same type, same peating levels, and producing a completely different character.
Yeah, I think that's probably something key to point out. Is Loch Gorm and Maury started with exactly the same spirit, same peating level, same fermentation, same distillation cut points. but going into different casks and aging for different lengths of time creates this wonderful different character to the whiskey, and completely different. And there's lots of comments going through on the taste about being caramel, sticky ribs. There's lots of sweetness and plum. I think it was mentioned in one of our tastings we did previously, where this one is kind of a balance of the Madeira and the port, where the Madeira is more of a dark fruit spiciness. Then you get the port, which is much more of a sweetness red fruit, and it's kind of somewhere in the middle. You get the spice, you get the dark fruit, but then you get this real sticky sweetness to it as well, and it's somewhere kind of a balance of the two. So really, different from the other wine casks we've used, and it's gone down unbelievably well on the tour. We had it as a sort of pre-release samples and launched on some of the tour events we did recently, and it certainly went down well with everyone there. I think someone asked you about where the inspiration comes from for the wine cask maturations, doing it full maturation. I guess some part of your background.
Well, yeah, because I was in the wine trade for 15 odd years. I think I've always felt, and Jim Swan always told me, that your spirit character will lend itself to be matured in different cask types. Sadly, he wasn't there to hold my hand in terms of what I was doing, so I went out and got on with it. And some have worked better than others. Nothing has been, oh God, what are we going to do with that? I think it's about working with different cooperages that you trust and have the knowledge, and sticking with a few cooperages rather than just buying casks from anybody. And I think that you begin to trust the cooperages that you work with, looking for different styles of fortified wine mainly. But as I say, we do fill some other wine casks at a lower alcohol strength. But we will refill these Maury casks, as we have with other cask types that work well, and then you can take them out further in terms of maturation. Instead of 4 or 5 years, we can hopefully take the next ones that we've refilled recently. We'll take them out for 10 years and see how that works.
So we did one of those with the port recently. We did a port cask maturation back in sort of 2014 as a first fill, kind of similar age actually, first fill sort of 4 or 5 years of age. And that was a similar ruby red, big punch. And then we did refilled those, and then we did a recent one where it was a combination of 6 and 10-year-old casks that were mostly refill. Still port mature, but a very different style of whiskey came through on the palate. And more comments here. It seems to be a talking point. Lots enjoying it. The full cask wine maturation as well. The fact that it's a full cask rather than a finish. Obviously, a long lingering finish on the tongue there. The 15th edition was going down well, and the sherry cask, 100% Islay. Only downside, it smells like tequila.
Well, this does.
Although they hinted that it may be one of the favourite smells from a 16-year-old, him when he was younger. Golden syrup balancing with the spirit. And there was a question on being amazing for young whiskey, and that was what it was designed for. You were mentioning earlier that yes, that was kind of the plan: a light spirit, high cut points, filling at a lower strength or 63.5%. Young, fresh, full of character was always the plan, and this is a sort of extreme example of it, but it is an example. And the question there about, are you doing different cut points when you use our own malt, the Rockside barley, 100% Islay, compared to the malt from Portellen?
There's similar cut points, but we have changed cut points with when we've experimented with barley varieties on the farm. When we've grown different barley varieties in the same field, we noticed that we needed to change the cut point slightly to get the character that we wanted. But there's always been this debate about barley varieties having a big impact on the style of whiskey. But then I would suggest that once you filled it into cask, then the cask influence is going to come through at the end of the day. But it's quite funny, allowing us to experiment, because we're growing the barley in the fields. We can run a few different experiments which are good, but I don't think we've had to change the cut points dramatically since Jim Swan set them up 20 odd years ago. And we're still using the same yeast variety. We have experimented with different yeast varieties, and again, that has an impact on the spirit character. But I've always been a believer that producing a spirit which is consistent in character is important, and then the wood, we're more interested in what we can do to tweak the characteristics coming through on the cask maturation.
A few more comments there. I think someone's tried a Lefroy, and someone enjoying the differences with the barley varieties and the different character that's coming through on them. A question on no longer getting our malt from Port Ellen, and where we're getting that from now.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting it from the mainland, like every third-party distillery on Islay that's not part of the Diageo group. We're buying it from Simpson's Malt, which is over on the east coast, but we send the peat over there so that our peat is used in the malting. So that, you know, I've always been a believer that Islay peat or the west coast peat is very different, and we need to make sure that ingredient is used in the peating stage at the maltings.
Yeah, I think that's key, isn't it? Although we might change the commercial malting, so we grow ourselves about 300 tons, we need to buy in extra. Although everything we've released so far has been Port Ellen malt, certainly everything here. In the future, there will be releases from non-Port Ellen malt, but we will be still Islay peat. You know, there might be a crossover of a year or so where it was mainland peat that was used, so that'll be interesting to see when those casks come to maturation what the differences are. But for us long term, it's always important to have Islay peat. As I said, it's not necessarily better peat on Ireland,
different character,
but different character. So if we're going to be an Islay whiskey and we're going to be from Kilchoman, we might as well make it as much about the place as possible. I think that comes true on the whiskies, and should do as much as we can. Struggling to see Jim Swan. We'll be releasing an STR soon. I mean, we do have plenty of STR casks in the warehouse. When and how we release them is probably the question. They've been in a few different releases.
Yeah, they have
batch strength casks releases that we do as part of the core range. That has some STR, recharged red wine casks in there, so that's used for part of them, and I'm sure there'll be one coming up.
Yeah, no, I mean they're great casks for us, and have really showcased that sort of summer fruit character that comes through so well on the recharged casks that we buy from Portugal, from Dias, who have been friends of ours for many years, and Jim Swan developed the shave toasted and recharged cask with the Dias cooperage going way back, and now you'll see a lot of releases from especially the newer distilleries with using STR casks because they work so wonderfully well with single malt whiskey.
I think it's the balance. I'm going to use your words.
Yeah, balance.
I think it's the balance. But we talk about casks a lot. I think that's again what we're probably either end of the process where the casks are so important, but the spirit we produce is equally, and you probably can't do one without the other. And producing something different in the spirit was always quite important. We didn't want to just copy. I guess Islay distilleries. Some are known for unpeated. I think there was a question actually whether we'll do some unpeated varieties in the future, and many Islay distilleries do unpeated, and many do really heavily peated, earthy, strong. Southern Isles are known for that. So we want to try and carve our own sort of niche with the character, and we use quite heavily peated malt, but throughout the whole process is almost counteracting that. Really tall, thin stills, a really high cut point, long fermentation. So we want to get a real fruity, light, fruity character coming through on the spirit. I think that's where the nice combination of flavors comes from is that it's smoky, it's Islay peat, yes, but actually it's loads of fruit in there as well, a bit of maltiness, and then the cask influence. There's a lot going on with the Kilchoman whiskies, and not necessarily at 20-30 years of age. These are 5, 10, and 15 years of age. The last one we'll try in a second.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we set out, it's expensive enough to build a distillery, and if you can get your whiskey out on the market and the consumers enjoy it at a young age, that was the sort of strategy and how we went about it. And fortunately, we got the timing right when consumers were really coming in to enjoy single malt. Whiskey clubs were set up all around the world, and specialist retailers. And age matters. Obviously, it matters, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the older whiskies are much better. They're different style and different character, and our whiskies tended to mature at a relatively young age. But then, you know, we make them and people drink them, and you know, we're now releasing, you know, a 20-year-old soon, and so that makes a massive difference to the product, and you just get more cask influence coming through as it ages for longer. But we had to set out to produce a spirit that was you know, that you could enjoy at a young age, and that once it was aged for a few years, it could be released. And I think that's important. It's great to see our 3, 4, and 5-year-old whiskies now develop into these slightly older whiskies that we're now putting out around the market.
Yeah, and there's a few more questions, but we'll pour the last dram and then take a couple of the other questions that come in. So the last one we're going to taste is the Fèis release. So quite a privileged group who bought the pack. So we're releasing this on Thursday when our Fèis day comes around, but this one is a pre-release, I guess. You know, no one else has sampled it. This is the only one, only ones to try it before, the ones who've got the pack here. So this is something a little bit special, and we do things a bit differently from most for the Fèis. A lot of distilleries now will do maybe 2 releases, or try and, I guess, you know, with whiskey fans all around the world, you know, you know, I think there's a temptation to try and please everyone, or try and get as much whiskey out around the world so everyone can enjoy the Fèis. We've gone a slightly different road, and I guess try to reward those who make the effort to get over to Islay for Fèis and come visit us. So we only release a Fèis release on Islay on the day of our festival day, which is on Thursday. And there's, I think, 600, just over 600 bottles in this year's release available on the day. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, I think the oldest one we've done so far. So this is a 15-year-old for Fèis, 10 years in ex-bourbon barrels. And then this one, unlike the others in the lineup, this one is a finish where we've had a calvados finish for 5 years. So slightly different from the others, as I mentioned, and bottled at cask strength as well. So all our Fèis releases are up at their natural cask strength, which I completely forget what this one is.
No, I can't remember.
50.9.
50.9.
50.9.
So quite low. But again, the Calvados casks have given their influence to what was ex-bourbon barrels for 10 years, and then a Calvados cask for 5, which is quite long time in Calvados cask. But what's coming is this wonderful fresh apple character. Not surprisingly, seeing Calvados casks still using apples, but there's a lovely fresh character to it. You know, the 15 years means it's softened and has some of that caramel butterscotch.
Yeah, it's kind of like those candy apples that you kind of used to have, and it's sort of I guess most similar probably to Whiskey One. We've gone through the wine cask maturations in the middle with a bit more punch, but probably more similar to Whiskey One, where the freshness is back, and that it's sweet fruit, candied fruit, and that orchard fruit, a really nice, you know, balance of sweetness and that fresh character coming through. Not as intense as the Maury, not that same intensity, but a really long finish, I guess, where it's kind of keeps developing. So after you followed it, that fruit comes back, then the sweetness, then the smoke. And I think probably maybe surprising 50 ppm as well. The peat is up at reasonably high, but it's not coming through in a big way. No,
it's there, but it's more in the background. And I think you know, age would show that as well, but the Calvados influence is certainly coming through as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's loads of Calvados on the palate. You maybe, you know, on the Huntington Islay, our own malt there, the lighter peating level, you're probably getting much more maltiness, maybe that salty smoke that's typical Kilchoman, and this is more heavily weighted towards the sweeter side of things, so a little less smoke. But I think what we're really proud of is being up at 51% alcohol. There's no bite, you know, there's no burn. It's very soft. It's really very soft, drinkable, and that's that, you know, some part to do with the age, where you're at 15 years of age now, and it's softened that and more depth of flavour. But I think a whiskey we're pretty proud of.
I see there's a question about do you filter your wort to get a fruitier spirit in the end? No, we just take longer to drain. We it's sort of half an hour, allowing it to sink through the bed of grist, and then it's just a question of getting a clear wort rather than a cloudy wort, and that allows the freshness to be retained.
Yeah, and then someone mentioned sort of comparing it to the 13-year-old that we did, was it last year or the year before? I think last year. And yeah, it's, that 13-year-old had about, I think it was somewhere between 10 and 20% influence from the Calvados cask, and very similar casks that we've used for this. So this will be more of Calvados influence, so a bit more sweetness, a bit more of that orchard fruit, but there'll be certainly some of the similarities with the 13-year-old that we did release last year. And few more questions coming in. There was a question about the malt floor that we have planned to increase the amount we grow and the malt floor, but that probably depends on how much money we've got.
Yeah, I know.
Can afford to build it.
I think at the moment those sort of plans have just been put on hold, but yeah, the idea is to bring more of our fields back into harvesting. So with a drainage program that will complete, in the next couple of years, and then we do intend to extend it so we can grow more of our own barley and increase the amount of 100% Islay Rockside whiskies that we release.
Yeah, I think that's always the plan, is to kind of grow as much as we can, isn't it? And be as self-sufficient on that as possible. And a few more sort of tasting notes and things. Very smooth. Calvados, someone asking, they might not be able to find it on Master Malt. I don't think so, unfortunately, unless there's several of them over and buying up bottles. We also try and limit it to one per person on the day, so everyone gets a chance to buy it on the day. But they usually sell out on our Fèis Day, which I think is great. That those who come over can take that back and get a momentum from the Fèis Day. A few others joining from Austria. Lovely dram. So yes, I think they've in this lineup it's really showing very different sides of Kilchoman. You've got the lighter peating level at the start, big wine cask maturations in the middle, and then something a bit older. As you mentioned, the 20-year-old. So we are doing, for our anniversary last year, we did a range of slightly older age statements. I think sort of, was it 14 up to 18 years of age, and this year we're doing a small range again of 4 releases, which will be coming out shortly, which is small batches, but 11 years old and 14-year-old and 18-year-old, and then a 20-year-old, which is the oldest whiskey we've ever launched, is as a 20-year-old, all ex-bourbon cask matured. So that will be, again, a milestone we've been waiting for quite a long time, but we've got there. You won't see a huge amount of Kilchomans because of the style of whiskey that you mentioned, which is young, it's fresh, full of character. The spirit is created for a certain style. We will have older whiskey, but it's always going to be a smaller part of what we
I think so. I think everyone asked me what's the sweet spot for Kilchoman in terms of maturation. Well, I think it depends who's enjoying it, but for me it's anything from 7 or 8 up to 14 or 15, and that's the sweet spot for me. But then others will argue that they'd like them younger because they have that youthful vibrancy about them, and then someone will like them a bit older, which has a more mellow, integrated and cask influence character.
Yeah. And we should say, for those who are commenting, and we probably missed a bunch of questions probably as we went through, but we'll get back to all of them after the tasting. Maybe not necessarily this evening, but we'll get back to them in the next couple of days and answer all your questions as they come through. So don't worry if you didn't get an answer. And I think, hopefully you enjoyed the whiskies. It's kind of the start of Fèis for us. It started on, was it Friday evening? Saturday was the first.
Friday evening, the parade in
Port Ellen, which we took home the prize, £100 for the best float at the parade. So another proud victory for Kilchoman. But we're in the midst of it now, and another few days to go before we get going on Thursday. But as I said, if you're on Islay, definitely drop down. We've got plenty going on for the day. And as I said, if you the pre-bookable events have all sold, but if you come along, there's plenty. There's open tastings and plenty to get stuck into. So
we're in production as well, which means you can wander into the still house and round the different areas of production, which is great to be able to do. And the guys will be in each area to answer any questions you have if you're over here.
Yeah. So for those who come, we've got the malt floor open, so you can chuck a bit of barley around and get into the still house where the guys will be producing on the day, into the warehouse where I think our number 1 cask will be up on the stow there in the warehouse, and then yeah, you can feel free to ask all the guys as many questions as you want as you travel around, and a few free drams to share along the way. But we'll probably leave you there and enjoy the rest of your Monday. 4 whiskies in on a Monday. It's a good way to start.
It's a great way to start the week anyway, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, thanks about guys, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Okay, night.